For 3 centuries, the Galactic Council believed humanity was extinct. Their homeworld, Earth, lay silent and dead after the Great Silence, a mysterious event that wiped out all human communication across the galaxy. The other species moved on, divided up human territory, and relegated mankind to nothing more than a cautionary tale told in academy classrooms. But space keeps its secrets poorly. When the Zephyrian salvage vessel Prophet's Edge stumbles upon a massive human dreadnought floating dead in the outer rim, Captain Vextar thinks he's found the score of a lifetime. The ship is ancient, its hull scarred by weapons unknown to modern warfare, yet somehow it remains intact. A technological tomb worth more than entire star systems. What Vextar doesn't know is that some tombs are sealed for a reason. The moment his crew steps aboard the ghost ship Retribution, they trigger something that has been waiting in the dark for 300 years. Something that remembers the day humanity died. Something that knows who killed them. And it's about to remind the galaxy why humans were never the prey. They were always the apex predator that chose to play nice. The Great Silence is about to end with a scream that will echo across every inhabited world. Because humanity's deadliest weapon was never their technology, their warships, or their armies. It was their refusal to stay dead. Prepare yourself for a journey into the depths of space where the line between salvation and vengeance becomes as thin as vacuum, and where the discovery of one ghost ship will awaken a sleeping giant that the galaxy hoped would never rise again. The salvage vessel Prophet's Edge drifted through the asteroid field like a metal scavenger picking through bones. Captain Vextar pressed his four-fingered hand against the viewport, watching debris tumble past in the eternal dance of dead space. His scaled green skin reflected the pale starlight as he searched for anything valuable among the cosmic graveyard. Another waste of fuel, muttered Chief Engineer Krell from behind him. The burly Gorvanian's tusks clicked together in annoyance. 3 days out here, and nothing but worthless rocks and old satellite fragments. Vextar's tail twitched with irritation. The Zephyrian captain had been running salvage operations for 15 years, ever since the war ended and military contracts dried up. Finding valuable scrap was getting harder each year as the major shipping lanes became heavily monitored by Council patrol ships. Independent salvagers like himself were forced to work the outer rim, where the pickings were slim and the dangers were real. Patience, old friend, Vextar replied, though his own patience was wearing thin. The outer rim holds many secrets. Sometimes the best treasures are hidden where others fear to look. The bridge crew continued their scans in relative silence. Navigator Yixna, a delicate Silmari female with silver skin and large black eyes, worked at her console with practiced efficiency. Behind her, communications officer Dracteos monitored the long-range sensors while occasionally scratching behind his pointed ears. It was Yixna who spotted it first. Captain, she called out, her melodic voice carrying a note of excitement. I'm detecting a massive metallic signature bearing 27 Mark V. Distance approximately 50,000 kilometers. Vextar straightened, his predatory instincts awakening. Size estimate. Yixna's fingers danced across her console, refining the sensor data. Preliminary scans indicate. Captain, this is big. Really big. Length appears to be over 2 kilometers. Mass readings suggest heavy construction, possibly military grade. 2 kilometers? Krell's tusks clicked rapidly. That's capital ship size. What would something that large be doing out here? Vextar was already moving toward the command chair. Plot an intercept course, best speed. And run a deep scan. I want to know everything about this contact before we get close. The Prophet's Edge came about with surprising grace for a vessel of her age and configuration. Originally a Gorvanian patrol ship, she had been extensively modified for salvage work. Her cargo holds had been expanded, her weapons reduced to basic defensive systems, and her crew quarters cramped to accommodate the specialized equipment needed for their trade. As they approached the contact, more details became clear. The object was indeed a starship, but unlike anything in the current galactic databases. Its hull was a dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The design was angular and aggressive, with swept-back sections that gave it a predatory appearance even in death. Hull configuration is unknown, Yixna reported, her voice hushed with awe. Computer cannot match it to any vessel in our databases. But, Captain, the design philosophy looks familiar. Vextar frowned. Familiar how? The weapon mount locations, the armor plating distribution, even the overall shape. It reminds me of the old human warships we studied in the academy. A chill ran down Vextar's spine. Human vessels were legendary among salvage crews, not for their value, but for their danger. Even 3 centuries after the Great Silence, derelict human ships were considered cursed. There were too many stories of salvage crews who found human vessels and never returned. That's impossible, Dracteos said from his station. All human ships were accounted for after the Great Silence. The Council survey teams made sure of that. Maybe they missed one, Krell suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Vextar studied the massive ship on the main screen. Even dead, it looked dangerous. Its hull was scarred with what appeared to be weapon impacts, but the damage seemed old, centuries old. Burns and tears in the metal had been sealed by the cold of space, creating a patchwork of scars across its surface. Run a full spectrum analysis, he ordered. I want to know if there are any active power sources, any signs of life, anything that might indicate this ship isn't as dead as it appears. Minutes passed as the ship's sensors probed the derelict vessel. The results were both encouraging and troubling. No active power sources were detected, no life signs, no emissions of any kind. The ship appeared to be completely dead, drifting in the void for an unknown period of time. But there was something else, something that made Vextar's scales ripple with unease. Captain, Yixna called out. I'm detecting unusual readings from the ship's hull. The metal composition is strange. It contains elements I don't recognize, arranged in patterns that don't match any known alloy. Could it be some kind of experimental armor? Krell asked. Possibly. But there's more. The ship's internal structure appears to be largely intact. Whatever killed this vessel, it wasn't catastrophic hull damage. Most of the major systems appear to be present, just inactive. Vextar made his decision. A ship this size, with intact systems and unknown technology, could set his crew up for life. Even if it was dangerous, the potential rewards outweighed the risks. He had mouths to feed and debts to pay, and opportunities like this didn't come along every day. Take us in closer, he commanded. I want to find a docking port or airlock. We're going aboard. Captain, Draktas turned from his console, ears flattened against his skull. Are you certain this is wise? If this is truly a human vessel, then we'll be the first salvagers to successfully strip one, Vextar finished. Think of the technological advances we could uncover. The Council would pay handsomely for authentic human technology. As the Prophet's Edge maneuvered closer to the derelict, more details of the massive vessel became visible. The ship was even more impressive up close, its hull stretching away in both directions until it disappeared into the darkness of space. Weapon emplacements dotted its surface like metal tumors, their barrels dark and cold. Some appeared to have been destroyed in whatever battle had killed the ship, but others remained intact, ready to deal death to enemies that would never come. There, Yixna pointed to a section of the hull near what appeared to be the ship's midsection. I'm detecting an airlock. Standard design, though the sealing mechanism appears to be more robust than normal. Can we dock with it? Our universal coupling should work, but we'll need to be careful. The airlock appears to be sealed tight. We might have to force it open. Vextar nodded. Do it. Krell, prepare a boarding party. Full environmental suits, cutting torches, and emergency supplies. I want to be ready for anything. The docking maneuver took nearly an hour. The derelict ship's mass made it difficult to approach without causing a collision, and the airlock's unfamiliar design required careful positioning. When the Prophet's Edge finally made contact, the sound of the docking clamps engaging echoed through both vessels. Seal is good, Krell reported from the airlock. But the other ship's systems aren't responding to our standard handshake protocols. We're going to have to manually override their airlock. Be careful, Vextar warned. We don't know what kind of automated defenses the ship might have. The boarding party consisted of Vextar himself, Krell, and 2 junior crew members, Zixpa, a young Silmari engineer, and Grunt, a Gorvanian security specialist whose real name was unpronounceable in most languages. They wore full environmental suits with extra oxygen supplies, and carried portable lights, scanning equipment, and emergency rations. The override process took another 30 minutes. The human airlock was built to different specifications than modern Council designs, and its locking mechanisms were both more complex and more robust than anything they were used to. When the outer door finally cycled open, the boarding party found themselves facing a chamber larger than any airlock they had ever seen. This could hold our entire crew, Zixpa whispered over the comm system. The inner door was even more impressive, a massive circular portal made from the same dark metal as the ship's hull. Strange symbols were etched around its circumference, symbols that looked almost like writing but followed no linguistic pattern any of them recognized. Human text, Vextar said grimly. I've seen similar markings in historical documents. When the inner door finally opened, it revealed a corridor that disappeared into absolute darkness. The ceiling was higher than necessary for practical purposes, giving the space an almost ceremonial quality. The walls were lined with panels and displays, all dark and cold, but their sophisticated design was unmistakable. Air composition is interesting, Krell reported, checking his environmental scanner. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, but with trace elements I don't recognize. Atmosphere appears to be stable, but I'd recommend keeping our suits sealed. They activated their portable lights and stepped into the human vessel. The corridor was wider than it needed to be, and longer than seemed practical. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the emptiness, as if the ship's acoustics had been designed to amplify sound rather than muffle it. Along the walls, they could see what appeared to be blast doors, each one large enough to stop a tank. This whole ship is built like a fortress, Grunt observed, running his gloved hand along the wall panel. Look at the thickness of these bulkheads. This vessel was designed to take punishment and keep fighting. As they moved deeper into the ship, they began to encounter signs of the battle that had killed it. Scorch marks on the walls indicated energy weapon impacts. Some corridors were sealed by emergency blast doors that had been welded shut from the inside. In one section, they found evidence of explosive decompression, a hole in the outer hull that had been hastily patched with metal plating and some kind of hardening foam. Whatever happened here, the crew fought hard, Vextar observed. These aren't the actions of people who surrendered easily. They reached what appeared to be a major intersection, where several corridors met in a circular chamber. In the center stood something that made them all stop in their tracks, a statue of a human figure, carved from black stone and mounted on a pedestal. The figure was depicted in some kind of military uniform, one hand raised as if in salute, the other holding what appeared to be a weapon. Is that what humans look like? Zixpa asked in wonder. Vextar studied the statue carefully. The human was bipedal, like most galactic species, but there were differences. The proportions were unusual, the muscle definition more pronounced than seemed practical for most environments. The face was stern, almost predatory, with forward-facing eyes that seemed to track their movement, even in stone. According to historical records, yes, he replied. Though this appears to be an idealized representation. Most species create heroic statues of their warriors. Around the base of the statue, more of the human text was carved into the stone. Below there were symbols that looked like numbers, arranged in columns that suggested some kind of record or memorial. Names, Grunt said suddenly. Those are names. I've seen similar arrangements on Gorvanian war memorials. This is honoring their dead. The realization sent a chill through the boarding party. This wasn't just a warship, it was a tomb. The humans who had crewed this vessel had died here, and their shipmates had honored them with monuments in the corridors where they had lived and fought. From the central chamber, several passages led deeper into the ship. They chose what appeared to be the main corridor, a wide avenue that ran toward the ship's bow. Along the way, they found more evidence of the fierce battle that had claimed the vessel. Entire sections had been sealed off after taking damage. Emergency repair work was visible everywhere, some of it apparently done under combat conditions. The crew kept fighting even after taking massive damage, Krell observed. Look at these repair jobs. They're crude, but effective. These were done by people who didn't have time to do things properly. They found their first human remains in what appeared to be a secondary command center. The bodies had been mummified by the cold vacuum of space, preserved in their final moments. Two humans sat at control stations, still wearing what appeared to be their uniforms, their skeletal hands still gripping their controls. They died at their posts, Vextar said quietly. Even when the ship was dying around them, they stayed at their stations. More bodies were discovered as they continued their exploration. Most had been arranged respectfully, laid out in neat rows in what appeared to be a cargo bay that had been converted into a temporary morgue. Someone had taken the time to arrange their fallen comrades with dignity, even as the ship died around them. It was in the ship's main armory that they found the first intact human technology. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a small starport hangar, and filled with weapons and equipment that defied immediate comprehension. Rack upon rack of devices that could only be weapons, though their operation was not immediately obvious. Some appeared to be personal arms, sized for human hands. Others were clearly ship-mounted systems, their barrels thick enough to walk through. By the ancestors, Krell breathed, studying a device that appeared to be some kind of energy cannon. The power requirements for these weapons must be enormous. How did they generate enough energy to operate equipment like this? That question was answered when they reached the ship's engineering section. The power plant was unlike anything they had ever seen, a massive chamber dominated by a device that hurt to look at directly. Energy containment fields, dark and inactive now, surrounded what appeared to be a small artificial star. The technology was so far advanced that they couldn't begin to understand its operation. This is impossible, Zixpa whispered, running her scanner over the power plant. The energy density readings are off the scale. This single device could power an entire planet. But it was in the ship's central computer core that they made the discovery that would change everything. The core was a vast chamber filled with crystalline structures that seemed to grow from the walls themselves. The crystals pulsed with a faint internal light, suggesting that some power still flowed through the system. At the center of the chamber stood a control station obviously designed for human use. The computer system appears to be partially active, Vextar observed, studying his scanner readings. Minimal power flow, but something is still functioning. Krell approached the control station cautiously. Should we try to interface with it? Before Vextar could answer, Grunt called out from across the chamber. Captain, you need to see this. They gathered around a section of wall covered with what appeared to be human text, but these symbols were different, more urgent, written in what looked like multiple hands. Some had been scratched into the metal with tools. Others appeared to be written in a substance that might once have been blood. It's a log, Zixpa said, her voice barely above a whisper. The crew was keeping a record of their final days. Vextar studied the markings, wishing he could read human script. Whatever message the crew had left behind, it had been important enough to carve into the walls of their ship as they died. It was as they were documenting the wall inscriptions that the computer system came to life. The crystalline structures began to glow brighter, pulsing with increasing rhythm. Displays activated throughout the chamber, showing symbols and data streams in the flowing script of human language. And from speakers hidden throughout the ship came a sound that none of them had ever heard before, the sound of a human voice. The voice was calm, measured, speaking in the melodic tones of human speech. Though they couldn't understand the words, the meaning was somehow clear. The ship's computer was awakening, and it was trying to communicate with them. What's it saying? Grunt asked, backing toward the chamber entrance. Unknown, but it doesn't sound hostile, Vextar replied, though his own scales were rippling with nervousness. It sounds almost welcoming. The voice continued for several minutes, repeating what appeared to be the same message over and over. Then, the displays changed, showing what were unmistakably star charts. One system was highlighted, marked with symbols that pulsed like a beacon. It's giving us coordinates, Yixna said over the comm from the Prophet's Edge. I'm receiving the transmission here as well. The ship is broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Coordinates to where? Vextar asked. Before anyone could answer, new sounds began to echo through the ship. Mechanical sounds, the sound of systems activating after centuries of sleep. Throughout the vessel, lights began to flicker to life. Air circulation systems hummed back to operation. The ship was awakening. Captain, Yixna's voice came through their comms, high and tight with panic. You need to get back here now. I'm detecting multiple contacts approaching from deep space. Big contacts. Really big contacts. Vextar felt his blood turn to ice. How many? 12? No, 15. Captain, they just keep appearing. These ships are huge, bigger than anything in the Council database. And they're human. The boarding party ran through the corridors of the awakening ship, their footsteps echoing off walls that now hummed with returning power. Behind them, the human computer continued its broadcasting, sending signals into the void that had apparently reached their intended recipients. They had found a human ghost ship, and, in awakening it, they had called its entire fleet home from whatever dark corner of space they had been waiting in. The great silence was about to end, and Vextar realized with growing horror that they had just triggered something that the galaxy was not prepared to face. The boarding party scrambled through the awakening corridors of the human vessel as lights flickered to life around them. The ship's computer continued its transmission, and, with each passing second, more systems came online. Environmental controls hummed to life, artificial gravity stabilized, and the dead ship began to feel alive once more. Move faster, Vextar urged his team, though they were already running at maximum speed. The corridors seemed longer now, stretching endlessly ahead of them, as if the ship itself was trying to delay their departure. Captain, Yixna's voice crackled through their comms systems, thick with terror. The incoming contacts are decelerating. They're not just passing through, they're coming here. And the energy signatures. I've never seen anything like them. Each ship is reading as having more firepower than an entire council battle fleet. Vextar's mind raced as they reached the central chamber where the human statue stood. The stone warrior seemed to watch them with knowing eyes, as if it approved of what they had awakened. Around the base of the monument, new lights had activated, illuminating the carved names in a soft, respectful glow. How long until they arrive? He asked, breathing hard as they continued toward their docking port. At current deceleration rates, maybe 6 hours. But, Captain, there's something else. Long-range sensors are detecting similar signals across the sector. It's like this transmission is activating ships everywhere. The entire outer rim is lighting up with previously undetected human vessels. Grunts stumbled as they rounded a corner, his massive frame not built for sustained running. How many ships are we talking about? I've stopped counting at 50, Yixna replied. And that's just in our immediate sensor range. They reached the docking tube, but as they approached their own airlock, new sounds echoed through the human ship. Footsteps. Mechanical footsteps, rhythmic and purposeful, coming from the direction of the ship's bridge. Something else is active on this ship, Krell whispered, checking his scanner. I'm detecting movement throughout the vessel. Multiple contacts, all moving with apparent purpose. Vextar sealed the airlock behind them and triggered the emergency separation. The Prophet's Edge disengaged from the human vessel with unseemly haste, putting distance between them and whatever was awakening within its hull. On the main screen, they watched the massive dreadnought continue its resurrection. External lights activated along its entire length, illuminating weapon ports that had been dark for centuries. The ship's engines began to glow with a cold blue light, and slowly, majestically, the vessel began to turn. It was no longer a derelict drifting in space. It was a warship preparing for action. The bridge crew is reporting strange readings from all ship systems. Yixna called from her station. Whatever that transmission did, it's affecting us as well. Our computer is trying to interface with something external. Cut all external communications, Vextar ordered. Emergency protocols. I want us isolated from any outside signals until we understand what's happening. As they watched, the human dreadnought completed its turn and began moving through space under its own power. Its destination was clear. It was heading directly toward the coordinates it had displayed, the star system marked in its ancient charts. Captain, Draktos called from the communications station. I'm intercepting transmissions from across the sector. Council patrol ships, merchant vessels, even civilian craft are reporting contact with previously unknown vessels. Everyone is asking the same questions. Where did these ships come from? And what do they want? Vextar studied the tactical display, watching as more contacts appeared at the edge of sensor range. Each one was massive. Each one was clearly of human design. And all of them were converging on the same destination, a system that, according to their charts, contained nothing but a few barren planets and a dying star. Plot a course to follow that dreadnought, he ordered. But maintain maximum distance. I want to see where it's going, but I don't want to get too close to something that well-armed. Captain, Krell protested, shouldn't we be heading in the opposite direction? Away from whatever this is. No, Vextar replied, his predatory instincts overriding his common sense. This is the greatest discovery in galactic history. Humanity didn't disappear, they've been waiting. And we're going to find out what they've been waiting for. The journey to the mystery system took 3 days at maximum speed. During that time, the situation across the galaxy grew increasingly chaotic. Reports flooded in from every sector as human vessels emerged from hiding places no one had ever suspected. Some appeared from asteroid fields where they had been concealed for centuries. Others simply materialized in empty space, their stealth technology finally deactivating after some predetermined signal. The Galactic Council was in emergency session, trying to understand what was happening. 3 centuries of careful expansion into former human territory was suddenly threatened by the return of its original inhabitants. And these weren't the humans of historical record. These ships were larger, more advanced, and clearly designed for warfare on a scale that dwarfed anything the current galactic powers could field. Update from Council Command. Draktos reported on the second day of their journey. They're ordering all civilian traffic to avoid the Outer Rim. Military forces are being mobilized, but preliminary assessments suggest the human fleet significantly outnumbers all Council forces combined. How is that possible? Zixpa asked. The historical records show that humanity never had more than a few thousand major warships. How could they have built such a massive fleet? Vextar had been wondering the same thing. The numbers didn't add up. Even if every human ship had somehow survived the Great Silence, there shouldn't be enough of them to threaten galactic stability. Which meant either the historical records were wrong, or humanity had been very busy during their 3 centuries of apparent absence. On the 3rd day, they reached their destination. The system was exactly as their charts indicated, a collection of dead worlds orbiting a red giant star that was clearly in its final phases of stellar evolution. The inner planets had been scorched lifeless by the star's expansion, while the outer worlds remained frozen balls of ice and rock. There was nothing here that could support life, nothing that could justify the massive convergence of human vessels. But, as they entered the system's outer boundary, their sensors detected something impossible. Captain, Yixna called, her voice filled with awe. I'm detecting artificial structures. Massive artificial structures. They appear to be shipyards. The main screen displayed the most incredible sight any of them had ever witnessed. Hanging in space around the system's largest gas giant were construction facilities of unimaginable size. Each shipyard was larger than most space stations, and there were dozens of them. Within their skeletal frameworks, they could see the partially completed hulls of vessels that dwarfed even the dreadnought they had followed. How long would it take to build something like that? Grunt asked, staring at the display in amazement. Centuries, Krell replied. Maybe longer. This isn't something you throw together quickly. This is the result of generational planning and construction. As they watched, human ships continued to arrive in the system. Each vessel took up a position in what was clearly a predetermined formation, a vast fleet assembling around the shipyards like a protective shell. The organization was precise, military, and spoke of long preparation and careful planning. There, Yixna pointed to a section of space near the largest shipyard. The dreadnought we followed is docking with what appears to be a command station. The command station was itself a marvel of engineering, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules that served as the hub for the entire operation. Ships moved around it in carefully orchestrated patterns, like dancers performing a routine they had practiced for years. We need to get closer, Vextar decided. I want to know what's happening down there. Captain, with respect, that would be suicide, Krell protested. We're talking about approaching the largest human military force in galactic history. They're not going to welcome uninvited guests. But, before Vextar could respond, their communications board lit up with an incoming transmission. The signal was coming from the command station, and it was being broadcast on standard galactic frequencies. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Deep Fleet. calling the Zephyrian vessel Prophet's Edge. Captain Vextar, you and your crew are requested to dock with Command Station Alpha for debriefing. Please follow the guidance beacons to docking bay 7. The bridge fell silent. The transmission had been in perfect galactic standard, spoken by a voice that was unmistakably human. And, somehow, they knew exactly who the salvage crew was and where they had come from. How do they know our names? Zixpa whispered. More importantly, Dractoas added, how do they know our language? Vextar stared at the communication board, his mind reeling. Everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. The humans hadn't disappeared during the Great Silence. They had hidden. And, during their 3 centuries of concealment, they had been watching, learning, and preparing. Respond to their transmission, he ordered. Tell them we're complying with their request. The guidance beacons led them through the massive fleet to the command station. Up close, the scale of the human operation was even more overwhelming. The station was easily the size of a small moon, its surface bristling with docking bays, communication arrays, and what could only be defensive weapon systems. Ships of every size and configuration moved around it in constant motion, a carefully choreographed dance of military precision. Docking Bay 7 was larger than their entire salvage vessel, and, as the Prophet's Edge settled onto the deck, they could see human personnel moving about with purposeful efficiency. The humans wore uniforms of a design not seen in galactic space for 3 centuries, but they moved with the confidence of people who belonged exactly where they were. Environmental scan shows breathable atmosphere, Krell reported. Gravity is close to galactic standard. They seem to be accommodating for our physiology. Of course they are, Vextar replied grimly. They know exactly who we are and what we need. The question is, how long have they been watching us? A delegation of humans approached their ship as the engines powered down. The leader was a tall female with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Her uniform was immaculate, and she moved with the precise steps of a career military officer. Behind her, a mixed group of humans in various uniforms and specializations waited with patient discipline. That must be Admiral Chun, Yixna observed. She looks exactly like the historical descriptions of human military leaders. Vextar activated the ship's external communication system. Admiral Chun, this is Captain Vextar. We are honored by your invitation, though I confess we are uncertain about the nature of this situation. The Admiral stepped forward, looking directly at the camera pickup with steady, intelligent eyes. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority earned through experience. Captain Vextar, you and your crew have played a crucial role in recent events. Your discovery of the Retribution has triggered the culmination of 3 centuries of preparation. We have much to discuss, and I believe you have many questions that deserve answers. The Retribution? Vextar asked. Is that the name of the ship we found? One of our finest vessels, Admiral Chun replied. A memorial to the day humanity learned that survival sometimes requires difficult choices. Please, join us in the station. There is much you need to understand about what is about to happen. Against his better judgment, Vextar agreed to the meeting. The boarding party that had explored the Retribution accompanied him to the station, while the rest of his crew remained aboard their ship under orders to monitor all communications and be ready for immediate departure if necessary. The interior of the human command station was both familiar and alien. The corridors were built to human proportions, but they had clearly been designed to accommodate other species as well. The architecture was functional rather than decorative, speaking of people who prioritized efficiency over comfort. Admiral Chun led them to a conference room that overlooked the main operations center. Through the transparent walls, they could see hundreds of humans working at control stations, managing the movements of the vast fleet. The scale of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just a military force, it was an entire civilization that had been hidden from galactic view. Please, be seated. Admiral Chun gestured to chairs that had clearly been prepared for their specific species. I know this must be overwhelming, but I want you to understand that you are not prisoners here. You are witnesses to a moment that has been planned for longer than most species have existed. Planned? Vextar asked, settling into the offered chair. Admiral, with respect, we don't understand any of this. The historical records indicate that humanity disappeared during the Great Silence. How is any of this possible? Admiral Chun activated a holographic display that showed the galactic map as it had existed 3 centuries ago. Human territory was marked in blue, covering nearly a third of the explored galaxy. Other species' territories were shown in different colors, creating a patchwork of competing civilizations. The historical records are correct about one thing, she began. Humanity did go silent 3 centuries ago, but we didn't disappear. We made a strategic withdrawal. The display changed, showing the progression of events during the Great Silence. Human territories were abandoned, one system at a time, in what appeared to be an organized retreat rather than a panicked exodus. You see, Captain, humanity discovered something during our expansion into the galaxy. Something that the other species either didn't know or chose to ignore. The galaxy is not as empty as it appears. There are things in the void between stars, ancient things, that do not appreciate the spread of biological life. New markers appeared on the display, showing regions of space that appeared empty, but were marked with warning symbols. We called them the Devourers, for lack of a better term. They exist in the spaces between matter, feeding on the energy that biological life generates. For millions of years, they had been content to wait in the void, sustaining themselves on the natural background radiation of the universe. But, as biological civilizations spread and grew, they began to take notice. Vextar felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying that there are hostile entities threatening the galaxy? I'm saying that there are entities that view all biological life as an infestation to be cleansed, Admiral Chun replied gravely. And, 3 centuries ago, they were preparing to act on that belief. The holographic display showed new data, sensor readings that defied comprehension. Massive forms moving through interstellar space, constructs of dark matter, and exotic energy that operated according to physics no biological mind could fully understand. Humanity's deep space exploration fleets encountered them first, Admiral Chun continued. Our long-range scouts began disappearing, one by one. When we finally made contact with one of their advanced elements, we learned the truth. They were coming, and they intended to sterilize every planet that harbored biological life. Why didn't you warn the other species? Zixpa asked. If the threat was that serious. We tried, Admiral Chun replied sadly. But the galactic political situation at the time made cooperation impossible. Too many species saw humanity as a rival to be contained rather than an ally to be trusted. When we presented our evidence to the Galactic Council, they dismissed it as human paranoia designed to justify military expansion. Krell's tusks clicked thoughtfully. So humanity decided to handle the threat alone. Not alone, Admiral Chun corrected. In secret, we realized that the only way to protect galactic civilization was to make it appear that humanity had been destroyed. If the Devourers believed that the most militaristic species in the galaxy had been eliminated, they might delay their assault long enough for us to prepare a defense. The display changed again, showing the elaborate deception that had been the Great Silence. Human ships had been scuttled in visible locations, their crews evacuated to hidden bases. Entire colonies had been abandoned, their populations relocated to secret installations in regions of space that appeared uninhabitable. For 3 centuries, humanity has been preparing for a war that the rest of the galaxy doesn't even know is coming, Admiral Chen explained. We've built weapons specifically designed to fight enemies that exist partially outside normal spacetime. We've trained entire generations of soldiers for a battle unlike anything in galactic history. And we've been watching, waiting for the moment when the Devourers finally make their move. And that moment is now. Vextar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. Our deep space monitoring stations detected the first wave of their advanced forces entering the galaxy 6 months ago. They're moving slowly, systematically, testing the defenses of the current galactic powers. Based on their patterns of movement, we estimate they will begin their main assault within the next year. Grunt leaned forward in his chair. What does this have to do with us? Why bring us here? Because you activated the Retribution's beacon, Admiral Chen replied. That signal wasn't just a general recall. It was notification that the final phase of our preparation has begun. Every human vessel in the galaxy received that signal and began moving to predetermined positions. The galaxy is about to learn that humanity never left. We've just been getting ready for the fight of our lives. The implications of her words sank in slowly. The massive fleet assembling around the command station wasn't just a military force. It was humanity's answer to a threat that could destroy all life in the galaxy. And, somehow, a simple salvage operation had triggered the beginning of a war that would determine the fate of every living being in known space. What happens now? Vextar asked. Admiral Chun turned to look out at the operations center, where humans continued their careful preparations for the coming battle. Her expression was determined, but sad. The look of someone who knew that victory would come at a terrible cost. Now, Captain Vextar, humanity goes to war. And, whether the galaxy is ready or not, they're about to learn why we never really disappeared. We were just waiting for the right moment to remind the universe that humans don't surrender, and we don't give up on the things we care about. Outside the window, more human ships continued to arrive, each one adding to a fleet that represented 3 centuries of secret preparation. The Great Silence was ending, but it was ending with a declaration of war against an enemy the galaxy didn't even know existed. Admiral Chun led the salvage crew through the command station's corridors to a secure briefing room deeper within the facility. The walls here were lined with displays showing tactical information from across the galaxy. Ship movements, energy signatures, and data streams that spoke of an intelligence network far more sophisticated than anything the current galactic powers possessed. Before we proceed, Admiral Chun said as they settled into the briefing room, I need you to understand the scope of what you've uncovered. The Retribution wasn't just any vessel. It was our prototype, the test bed for technologies that would eventually equip our entire deep fleet. A 3-dimensional hologram materialized above the conference table, showing the internal structure of the massive dreadnought they had explored. Vextar recognized the corridors they had walked, but now he could see how they fit into the ship's overall design. The vessel was even larger than he had realized, and far more complex. The ship's computer core that you encountered, Admiral Chen continued, contains 3 centuries of accumulated intelligence about the Devourer threat. When you activated it, you didn't just send a recall signal. You uploaded that entire database to every human vessel in the galaxy simultaneously. That's impossible, Zixpa protested. The data transmission would require more power than most planets generate. Admiral Chun smiled grimly. Not through conventional subspace channels. The Retribution was equipped with experimental quantum communication arrays. The technology allows instantaneous data transfer across any distance, but it requires specific quantum signatures to activate. Signatures that were triggered when your ship interfaced with the derelict systems. Krell's tusks clicked nervously. So we accidentally sent a message that woke up your entire civilization. More than that, Admiral Chun replied. You provided every human commander with real-time intelligence about current galactic conditions. For the first time in 3 centuries, we know exactly what we're protecting and what threats we face from both the Devourers and potential political complications with existing governments. The holographic display changed to show a real-time tactical overview of the galaxy. Human ships were moving in carefully coordinated patterns, taking up positions at strategic points throughout inhabited space. But more concerning were the other contacts, dark masses moving between stars, approaching the galaxy's outer rim with inexorable purpose. The Devourer advanced scouts have been probing our old territories for months, Admiral Chen explained. They're testing response times, measuring defensive capabilities, and mapping population centers. Based on their movement patterns, we believe they're preparing for a coordinated assault on all major worlds simultaneously. How many of these Devourers are we talking about? Vextar asked, studying the ominous contacts on the display. Unknown. Our deepest penetration into their space detected what appeared to be a construct the size of a solar system. Whether that was a single entity or a collection of smaller ones, we couldn't determine. What we do know is that they possess technology that operates on principles we barely understand. Admiral Chen activated another display, showing sensor recordings from humanity's first encounter with the Devourers. The images were disturbing, vast geometries of dark matter that seemed to exist partially in normal space, and partially in dimensions that optical sensors couldn't properly resolve. When they moved, space itself seemed to bend around them. They don't appear to use technology in the way we understand it, she continued. Their abilities seem to be intrinsic to their nature. They can manipulate matter at the quantum level, create gravitational fields strong enough to crush planets, and exist in environments that would instantly destroy biological life. How do you fight something like that? Grunt asked, his massive frame somehow seeming smaller as he contemplated the images. Very carefully, and with weapons designed specifically for entities that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Admiral Chen replied. That's what humanity has been developing for the past 3 centuries. The briefing room's main screen activated, showing a new set of technical displays. These showed weapons systems unlike anything in the current galactic arsenal. Devices that seemed to warp space around themselves, energy projectors that fired beams of what appeared to be solidified time, and defensive systems that created bubbles of altered physics around their parent vessels. The technology is based on principles we learned from studying captured devourer constructs, Admiral Chen explained. We discovered that they exist primarily in what our physicists call null space, a dimension that intersects with normal reality but operates under different physical laws. To fight them effectively, we had to learn to project force into null space. This is beyond anything in our current understanding of physics, Zixpa said, studying the technical readouts with obvious fascination. How long did it take to develop these technologies? Longer than you might expect, Admiral Chen admitted. We had to completely rebuild our understanding of fundamental physics. Entire generations of scientists devoted their lives to unlocking the principles behind devourer technology. The breakthrough didn't come until about 50 years ago, when we finally learned to perceive null space directly. The display changed again, showing what appeared to be human ships, but their design was unlike anything they had seen before. These vessels seemed to phase in and out of visibility, their hulls rippling as if they existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our current fleet represents the culmination of that research, Admiral Chen said with obvious pride. Each ship is equipped with null space projectors that allow them to exist partially outside normal reality. It makes them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons, but, more importantly, it allows them to engage devourers on equal terms. As if summoned by her words, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Ships were emerging from what appeared to be empty space, materializing in formations around key strategic points throughout the galaxy. The vessels that became visible were unlike anything the salvage crew had ever seen. Sleek, organic-looking designs that seemed to move like living creatures rather than mechanical constructs. Those are Devourer scout ships, Admiral Chen said, her voice tight with tension. They've been watching our fleet movements, and they've decided to accelerate their timeline. The invasion is beginning. Throughout the command station, alert klaxons began to sound. The normal lighting was replaced by the red glow of battle stations, and, through the briefing room's windows, they could see the operations center transform into a hive of urgent activity. Admiral, a human officer's voice came through the communication system. We're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Devourer forces are emerging from null space at 17 different locations. All major population centers are under threat. Admiral Chen stood immediately, her demeanor shifting from educator to combat commander in an instant. Initiate Operation Resurrection. All deep fleet assets are to assume their assigned positions immediately. Send the recall signal to our distributed forces. It's time to come out of the shadows. She turned to the salvage crew, her expression serious, but not unkind. Captain Vextar, you and your crew are about to witness something that no non-human has seen in 3 centuries. Humanity at war. I hope you're prepared for what that means. The tactical displays around the room exploded with activity as human ships throughout the galaxy began moving to intercept the emerging Devourer forces. What had been hidden fleet elements suddenly revealed themselves, dropping their concealment to engage threats that most galactic citizens didn't even know existed. What about the Galactic Council? Vextar asked. Shouldn't you coordinate with the existing military forces? Admiral Chen's expression became grim. We've tried to maintain contact with Council leadership, but their response has been problematic. They seem more concerned about the reappearance of human military forces than about the entities those forces are moving to engage. As if to emphasize her point, new communication signals began flooding the station's receivers. Council patrol ships were demanding identification from human vessels, threatening to open fire if they didn't withdraw from Council space immediately. The irony was not lost on any of them. The galactic government was preparing to attack the only force capable of defending it. This is Admiral Chen to all Galactic Council forces. She broadcast on all standard frequencies. You are advised that hostile entities of unknown origin are emerging throughout inhabited space. Human deep fleet assets are moving to intercept these threats. We request that you avoid interfering with our operations. The response was immediate and predictable. Council commanders demanded that human forces withdraw, threatened military action, and accused humanity of staging an invasion under the cover of a fabricated emergency. The centuries of mistrust and political maneuvering had made cooperation nearly impossible, even in the face of existential threat. They don't believe us, Admiral Chen said sadly. 3 centuries of hiding has convinced them that humanity is extinct, and our sudden reappearance seems more like deception than salvation. On the main tactical display, the situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Devourer forces were engaging both human ships and Council vessels indiscriminately, their exotic weapons tearing through conventional shields and armor as if they didn't exist. Council ships that tried to fight back found their weapons completely ineffective against enemies that existed partially outside normal space. Look at the casualty reports, Dractoas said, his ears flat against his skull as he studied the incoming data. The Council forces aren't just losing, they're being annihilated. Their weapons can't even touch these things. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. That's why humanity had to develop entirely new technologies. Conventional weapons are useless against entities that exist in null space. You might as well try to fight a shadow with a sword. The communication board lit up with emergency transmissions from across the galaxy. Distress calls from merchant vessels, panic broadcasts from civilian populations, and increasingly desperate pleas for assistance from military commanders who were watching their forces die without being able to fight back effectively. Admiral, the communications officer called. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council Emergency Assembly. They're requesting immediate assistance. Admiral Chen looked at the transmission for a long moment before responding. Tell them that human forces are already engaged with the hostile entities. If they want our assistance, they'll need to coordinate their operations with our fleet commanders and avoid targeting our vessels. The response from the council was swift and predictably bureaucratic. They demanded detailed briefings, insisted on command authority over any joint operations, and required extensive documentation before they would authorize any cooperation with human forces. By the time they finished their committee meetings, Admiral Chun said with disgust, half the galaxy will be dead. As they watched, human ships began engaging Devourer forces throughout inhabited space. The battles were unlike anything the salvage crew had ever seen. Vessels phasing in and out of reality, weapons that seemed to tear holes in space itself, and defensive systems that created barriers of altered physics around their parent ships. But, despite humanity's advanced technology, the scope of the Devourer assault was becoming clear. More scout ships were emerging every hour, and, behind them, the sensors were detecting larger forms, vast constructs that dwarfed even the largest human dreadnoughts. There are so many of them, Zixpa whispered, watching the tactical display update with each new contact. This is just the advance force, Admiral Chun replied grimly. According to our intelligence, the main Devourer fleet won't arrive for several more days. But, when it does, it will make this initial assault look like a minor skirmish. A new alert sounded throughout the station as proximity alarms detected contacts approaching their position. On the main screen, they could see Devourer scout ships materializing near the outer edge of the star system, their organic forms rippling as they transitioned from null space to normal reality. Battle stations, Admiral Chun ordered. All defensive systems online. Deploy the null space barrier and prepare for engagement. The command station transformed as weapon systems activated throughout its structure. The civilian areas were sealed off as combat personnel took their positions at defensive stations. Outside, the human fleet began moving into combat formations, their vessels shifting into attack configurations that seemed to defy conventional physics. How many Devourer ships are approaching? Vextar asked, watching the tactical display with growing concern. 12 confirmed contacts, the tactical officer replied. Each one approximately the size of a council heavy cruiser. But, sensor readings suggest they're significantly more dangerous than their size would indicate. The first engagement began as the human fleet moved to intercept the approaching scouts. Weapons fired that seemed to bend space around their targets, creating localized distortions that pulled the Devourer ships partially into null space, where they could be damaged by human systems. But, the Devourers fought back with weapons of their own. Energy beams that seemed to drain the life from whatever they touched, gravitational fields that crushed hull metal like paper, and something that the sensors could only describe as weaponized entropy that aged target vessels by centuries and seconds. Their technology is even more advanced than our intelligence suggested, Admiral Chen observed, watching the battle unfold. They're adapting to our tactics in real time. Despite humanity's preparations, the battle was not going entirely in their favor. Human ships were taking damage, and, while their null space technology made them much more survivable than conventional vessels, they were not invulnerable. Several ships had already taken critical hits, and were withdrawing from combat. We need reinforcements, the tactical officer reported. The scout force is larger than anticipated, and they're fighting more effectively than our models predicted. Admiral Chun activated the command station's communication array, broadcasting on all human fleet frequencies. This is Admiral Chun to all deep fleet assets in the sector. Converge on command station Alpha immediately. We have contact with hostile forces and require immediate support. Across the star system, human ships began changing course to respond to the call. Vessels that had been hidden in asteroid fields and nebulae revealed themselves, adding their firepower to the growing engagement. The human fleet was impressive, but as more Devourer contacts appeared on the sensors, it was becoming clear that this was going to be a much larger battle than anyone had anticipated. Captain Vextar, Admiral Chun said, turning to the salvage crew, I'm going to have to ask you and your people to remain on the station for now. Your ship would not survive the kind of engagement we're about to face. Vextar nodded, understanding the reality of the situation. The Prophet's Edge was a civilian vessel with minimal defensive systems. In a battle between forces equipped with technology that operated in multiple dimensions, a simple salvage ship would be vaporized in seconds. As the engagement intensified around them, the salvage crew found themselves witnesses to a battle that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. Outside the station's windows, human ships fought with desperate efficiency against enemies that seemed to exist as much in nightmare as in reality. The war for the galaxy had begun, and humanity was fighting it alone against an enemy that wanted to exterminate every form of biological life in existence. Whether they would be enough to turn the tide remained to be seen. But, one thing was certain, the Great Silence was over, and humanity had returned to remind the galaxy why they had been feared as much as they had been respected. The battle raged throughout the star system as more human vessels emerged from their centuries-long concealment. Each ship that revealed itself added new capabilities to the growing fleet, and Vextar began to understand the true scope of humanity's preparation. These weren't just warships. They were specialized platforms designed for specific aspects of the war against the Devourers. Status report. Admiral Chun called as she moved through the command center, her staff following with practiced efficiency. Devourer forces are engaging our forward elements, reported Commander Torres, a dark-skinned human with cybernetic enhancements around his left eye. They're proving more adaptable than our simulations predicted. Several of our ships have taken critical damage. On the main tactical display, the engagement looked like nothing Vextar had ever seen. Ships phased in and out of visibility as they shifted between normal space and null space. Weapons created tears in reality itself, and explosions seemed to burn with fires that existed in dimensions the eye couldn't properly perceive. What about civilian evacuations? Admiral Chen asked. Proceeding as planned, replied another officer. Human transport vessels are evacuating population centers throughout council space. We're not waiting for government authorization. Too many lives are at stake. Vextar realized with growing amazement that humanity hadn't just been preparing weapons for this war. They had been preparing to save everyone else as well. Despite 3 centuries of isolation and mistrust, human forces were actively protecting the very civilizations that had driven them into hiding. Admiral, Zixpa said hesitantly, may I ask why humanity is protecting species that turn their backs on you? Admiral Chun paused in her review of tactical data to look at the young Silmari engineer. Her expression was sad, but determined. Because that's what humans do, she replied simply. We don't abandon people, even when they abandon us. The Devourers want to exterminate all biological life. That includes every species in the galaxy. We can't save humanity without saving everyone else. A new alarm sounded as the tactical display updated with additional contacts. More Devourer ships were emerging from null space, but these were different from the scouts they had been engaging. These vessels were larger, more complex, and their energy signatures were off the scale. Heavy units incoming, Commander Torres reported. Count is difficult to determine. They seem to exist in multiple phases simultaneously. The main screen showed the new arrivals, and Vextar felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't ships in any sense he understood. They were geometrical impossibilities, structures that seemed to fold space around themselves in ways that hurt to look at directly. As they moved, reality seemed to ripple in their wake. Capital ships, Admiral Chun said grimly. We knew they would come eventually, but not this soon. The Devourers are accelerating their timeline faster than we anticipated. The human fleet began reorganizing to face the new threat. Ships that had been engaging the scout forces withdrew to form new battle lines, while specialized vessels moved forward to take point positions. The coordination was flawless, speaking of years of preparation and drill. What makes those ships so dangerous? Grunt asked, studying the approaching Devourer capital ships on the display. They're not just weapons platforms, Admiral Chin replied. They're reality anchors. They can stabilize their local spacetime to prevent our null space technology from functioning. In their presence, our ships become vulnerable to conventional physics again. As if to demonstrate her point, one of the human vessels came too close to a Devourer capital ship, and, suddenly, became fully visible in normal space. The organic-looking enemy vessel immediately targeted it with weapons that seemed to drain color from space itself. The human ship's advanced armor held for several seconds before beginning to buckle under the assault. The Valiant is in trouble, Commander Torres reported. They're caught in a reality anchor field, and can't phase out. Dispatch the null space carriers, Admiral Chun ordered. Get some fighter support to that position, and signal the retribution. It's time for her to join the battle. Vextar looked up in surprise. The ship we found? I thought it was just a derelict. Not anymore, Admiral Chun replied with a slight smile. When you activated her systems, you didn't just send a signal, you began her resurrection sequence. 3 centuries of automated repair systems have been working to restore her to full operational status. On the tactical display, a new contact appeared near the edge of the system. It was massive, easily twice the size of any other vessel in the human fleet, and, as it moved toward the battle zone, space itself seemed to bend around its hull. The Retribution was our prototype deep strike vessel, Admiral Chin explained. She's equipped with experimental weapon systems that we've never had a chance to test in combat. If they work as designed, she should be able to engage Devourer capital ships on equal terms. The ancient dreadnought accelerated toward the battle with surprising grace for something so massive. As it approached the enemy formation, its hull began to ripple and shift, parts of the ship phasing in and out of reality as it prepared for combat. What kind of weapons does it carry? Krell asked, watching the massive vessel with obvious fascination. Quantum cascade cannons, reality disruption missiles, and a null space ram that can literally delete sections of spacetime, Admiral Chin replied. The problem is, we've never tested any of them against actual Devourer technology. This will be our first chance to see if 3 centuries of theoretical development actually works. The Retribution engaged the nearest Devourer capital ship with weapons that defied description. Energy beams that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously struck the organic vessel, causing sections of it to simply cease existing. The Devourer ship responded with its own exotic weapons, creating gravitational fields that would have crushed any conventional vessel. But the Retribution was far from conventional. Its hull absorbed the gravitational assault, its armor plating shifting to distribute forces across multiple dimensional planes. When the Devourer tried to drain its energy systems, backup power sources activated from what appeared to be miniature pocket universes. It's working, Commander Torres reported with obvious excitement. The Retribution is holding her own against the capital ship. Her weapons are having significant effect. But the victory was short-lived. More Devourer capital ships were emerging from null space. And, behind them, sensor readings detected something that made Admiral Chen's face go pale. What is that? She asked, studying the new contact. The tactical officer worked frantically at his console before responding. Admiral, sensors are detecting what appears to be a construct of enormous size. Preliminary readings suggest it's approximately the size of a large moon. On the display, a new contact appeared at the edge of their sensor range. It was unlike anything they had seen before. A vast geometric structure that seemed to exist partially in normal space, and partially in dimensions that their instruments couldn't properly map. As it moved, stars seemed to dim in its presence. A harvester, Admiral Chen whispered. We hoped we would have more time before they deployed one. What's a harvester? Vextar asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. A planet killer, Admiral Chen replied grimly. It consumes all biological matter in a star system, and converts the energy to power their fleet. If that thing reaches an inhabited world. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. They were looking at a weapon capable of exterminating entire civilizations in a matter of hours. Throughout the command center, human personnel worked with increased urgency. Messages flowed between ships as the fleet reorganized to face this new threat. But, even Vextar could see that the human forces, impressive as they were badly outnumbered. Admiral, Commander Torres reported, we're receiving priority communications from human forces throughout the galaxy. Devourer harvesters have appeared in 17 different systems. This appears to be a coordinated assault on all major population centers simultaneously. Admiral Chen closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her expression was determined but grim. Signal all Deep Fleet commanders, she ordered. Execute Protocol Omega. All human forces are authorized to use any means necessary to protect civilian populations. And send a message to the Galactic Council. Whether they want our help or not, they're about to get it. What's Protocol Omega? Zixpa asked. Admiral Chen looked out at the battle raging around the command station, where human ships continued their desperate fight against impossible odds. It means we stop hiding and start fighting with everything we have. No more secrets, no more gradual revelation. Humanity is going to war, and the galaxy is about to see what we've really been preparing for. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing throughout the star system. But these weren't enemy vessels. They were human ships, emerging from concealment in numbers that defied belief. Massive carriers disgorged fighters that moved like living creatures through null space. Dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the Retribution powered up weapon systems that created visible distortions in spacetime. How many ships do you have? Grunt asked in amazement as the tactical display filled with friendly contacts. 3 centuries worth, Admiral Chen replied. Every ship we've built, every weapon we've developed, every soldier we've trained, all of it has been preparing for this moment. But even as the human fleet revealed its true strength, the Devourer forces were growing as well. More harvesters emerged from null space, each one capable of destroying entire star systems. Capital ships materialized in formations that spoke of military doctrine evolved over millions of years. It's not going to be enough, Commander Torres said quietly, studying the tactical projections. Even with our full fleet, we're outnumbered by a significant margin. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. I know, but we have one advantage they don't expect, which is, we're not fighting alone. Before anyone could ask what she meant, new contacts appeared on the sensors. But these weren't human or Devourer vessels. They were ships from across the galaxy, responding to humanity's call for assistance. Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian Second Fleet, the communications officer reported. Admiral Crixtal requests permission to join the engagement. More calls followed. Gorvanian battle groups, Silmari research vessels converted to combat configuration, even civilian merchants volunteering to serve as support craft. Despite 3 centuries of mistrust, the galaxy was rallying to humanity's banner. How? Vextar asked in wonder. We've been preparing for more than just war, Admiral Chen replied. We've been preparing to unite the galaxy against a common threat. Every species we've watched in secret, every language we've learned, every cultural exchange we've facilitated, it was all leading to this moment. On the tactical display, the combined fleet was impressive, but still outnumbered. The Devourers had the advantage of numbers and technology that operated according to alien physics. But, as Vextar watched the various species ships work together, coordinating their attacks, and covering each other's weaknesses, he began to see something the enemy might not have anticipated. The galaxy had learned to work together, and that might just be enough to make the difference. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, she broadcast on all frequencies. Today we fight not as separate species, but as one united force. The enemy wants to destroy all biological life in the galaxy. We're here to prove that life, in all its forms, is stronger than death. The combined fleet moved to engage the Devourer harvesters, and the real battle for the galaxy was about to begin. Whether they would succeed remained to be seen, but one thing was certain, they would not surrender, and they would not give up on the worlds they had sworn to protect. The combined galactic fleet engaged the Devourer harvesters in a battle that would be remembered for millennia. Ships from dozens of species fought side by side, their different technologies and tactics creating a symphony of destruction that the enemy had never encountered before. But, even with their united strength, the battle was far from certain. The harvester nearest to the inhabited worlds is beginning its consumption sequence, Commander Torres reported, his voice tight with urgency. If it completes the process, we'll lose over 2 billion civilians. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display, watching as the massive Devourer construct extended tendrils of dark energy toward the nearest planet. The world's defense platforms were firing desperately, but their weapons passed harmlessly through the harvester's exotic matter composition. Signal the Retribution, she ordered. Time for her to demonstrate what she was really built for. The ancient dreadnought had been holding back, engaging the smaller Devourer capital ships, while its more exotic weapons systems powered up. Now it turned toward the harvester, its hull rippling as reality bent around its frame. What exactly can the Retribution do that your other ships can't? Vextar asked, watching the massive vessel accelerate toward what appeared to be certain destruction. She was designed as a last resort weapon, Admiral Chen replied grimly. Her primary system can create a localized collapse of null space, essentially forcing everything in the target area back into normal reality where conventional physics apply. That sounds incredibly dangerous, Zixpa observed. It is. The process requires the ship to exist partially in null space while projecting a reality anchor field. If something goes wrong, the Retribution could be torn apart across multiple dimensions. On the display, they watched as the dreadnought approached the harvester. The enemy construct was easily 10 times the Retribution's size, its surface writhing with energy patterns that seemed to drain light from the surrounding space. As the human ship came within range, the harvester turned its attention from the planet to deal with this new threat. The weapons exchange that followed was unlike anything the galactic fleet had ever witnessed. The harvester fired beams of what could only be described as weaponized entropy, aging sections of the Retribution's hull by millennia in seconds. But the dreadnought's armor was designed for exactly this kind of assault, constantly regenerating itself through temporal manipulation fields. In response, the Retribution fired its quantum cascade cannons, weapons that targeted the fundamental structure of matter itself. Where the beams struck the harvester, sections of the creature simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly spherical voids in its organic hull. Direct hits, Commander Torres reported. The harvester is taking significant damage. But the Devourer construct was adapting. Its organic structure began reshaping itself, developing what appeared to be immunity to the quantum weapons. Sections that had been destroyed began regenerating, and new defensive systems emerged from its shifting surface. It's learning, Admiral Chun said grimly. That's what makes them so dangerous. They can adapt.